Thanks, Sheree. Thanks. Can you hear me okay? Oh, I can hear me okay. Okay, let me this up. Hang on just a second. There we go. Okay. So first I want to, oh, now it's stopped. No, it's still going. I wanted to say thank you for the snow. It's snowing just a tinch. I've been telling people this morning how much I miss the snow living in Florida. So I was hoping to see some, so there's a little bit. You know how you prepare for talks? Maybe. You prepare for talks, and sometimes they're, you know exactly what you're going to say, and it's mapped out, and it's this nice, neat package, and you're good to go. And at other times, you're still kind of mulling over some ideas, playing with some ideas, and it's still a work in progress. This is the latter. So I ask for your gentleness with some possibly rough transitions. I remember a few years ago going to see David Sedaris, who's an American writer and humorist, and it was fascinating. He came out with sheets of paper and a pencil, and he was working on some stories in progress, and he would read them and kind of see if we were laughing or not, and then write notes, and it was fascinating. So this isn't quite that rough, but I figure there's precedent for that. Also, I ask for your forgiveness because I'm going to use some language that within some disciplines, these words may have very specific and precise meanings. Well, in SoTL, it's this trading zone where we exchange ideas across disciplines and exchange language and try to learn from each other. So I'm going to be using some words that may have very precise meanings in your discipline, and I may not be using them exactly the way that you do. So I ask for your openness in this trading zone. I think I've finally made peace, as an English PhD, I think I've finally made peace with the literature review. Yeah, okay. So I want to begin with this common metaphor for what we do in the scholarly world. So this is a quote. For many of you, this may be familiar. Kenneth Burke. We often talk about it as the unending conversation. And he writes, imagine that you're in a parlor, or that you enter a parlor. You come late. When you arrive, others have long preceded you, and they are engaged in heated discussion. You listen for a while until you decide that you've caught the tenor of the argument. Then you put in your oar. Someone answers, you answer him, another comes to your defense, another aligns himself against you, of course, to either embarrassment or gratification of your opponent. The hour grows late, you must depart, and you do depart with the discussion still vigorously in progress. So this is a frequent quote that we talk about as the unending conversation that is the scholarly work that we do. And I want to begin with that because I'm going to dip in and out of some conversations, and I want to keep in mind that these are important conversations, just in different rooms. So if we are looking at a house with a parlor, or a bunch of parlors, a bunch of rooms, each one is a different conversation, and we're going to dip into a few and leave a few behind, not because they're wrong, not because we reject them, but because we want to have a particular, I want to have a particular conversation today. So the conversation that holds all of these conversations together, or the topic that holds all of these conversations together, is what happens in the wake of SoTL. Just generally, in the wake of SoTL. So that's a broad, is it after SoTL? Is it because of SoTL? But in the wake of SoTL, that's kind of the big topic where a lot of conversations intersect, touch on this issue. So in the wake of SoTL, one of the most, actually two of the most common conversations, I put them in adjoining rooms, sort of, or neighboring rooms, they're not technically adjoining, are the conversations about impact, and similarly, or connectedly, the conversations about effect or affect. English, so of course I'm thinking of all the nuanced differences there. So these are important conversations. Why are they important? The conversation about impact, which is ubiquitous, is important because primarily when we're talking about SoTL, we talk about impact to demonstrate and prove its value, its worth, often to administrators and beyond, right? We have to demonstrate its value. And so we have to talk about the impact. How do we talk about it? How do we measure that? And then we talk about effect, often within SoTL. When we're talking about the effect of a particular way of teaching, a particular activity, a particular assignment, the effect on student learning. We're trying to demonstrate or prove the effectiveness of this activity on student learning, how it affects student learning. So both of these conversations will undoubtedly occur here today and tomorrow. And they're important conversations. They're necessary for the survival of the field. For many conversations, the currency is proof. And these are often the conversations where that takes place. But these are not the conversations that I want to begin this conference with. For three reasons. You may be familiar with, Catherine Sutherland has this lovely poem in one of the issues of Teaching and Learning Inquiry, and I've excerpted it here. And she raises an important issue about impact. Pardon me while I read just a little bit of it. Enhancement and effectiveness give us already two other words to counter the violence of impact. Such a slamming, crashing, thudding word that bumps up against and into our disciplinary colleagues. And have we stopped to think that discipline itself is another violent word with its connotations of punishment and control? Each of us could choose to use different words, different images, less violent, less neoliberal language, and more connecting, collaborating, challenging, and creative narratives. Economic metaphors are not the only ones available to us. And then she ends. In our development work and in our language, and I would say also in our SoTL, let us endeavor not to make an impact, but instead to make a difference. So she's part of this conversation about what happens in the wake of SoTL and how do we talk about it. And when we talk about impact, what happens because of that? We use this very violent metaphor. So that's one of the reasons I don't want to start with that conversation today. Another reason is because discussions of impact and effect for a literary scholar, they feel very neat, almost too neat for the way that I think about knowledge and knowledge making. Catherine Lewis and colleagues, when they have this wonderful article on lesson study, or how we should use research on teaching and learning to, they talk about, contribute to instructional improvement. So thinking about the relationship between the research that we're doing and teaching. And part of what they talk about is this neatness. They say that the very qualities that suit an innovation to controlled trial, to demonstrate effect, may handicap it at the later stage of broad dissemination. It should be incumbent on researchers to justify their choice of research methods based on the endpoint, instructional improvement at sites of spread or dissemination and application, not just the premature stopping point, proof of innovation effectiveness under controlled conditions. So here they're kind of asking about how appropriate is it to have these very precise measures of effect in these messy processes of teaching and learning where we want them to actually have an impact on how we do our work. Nope. Donald Schoen, don't worry, I don't have a ton of slides with text, just a few, but yeah. And in literature, I have to say I love quoting people and I love text, so I always say I'm not going to apologize for the slides with text, but then that means I kind of do. There's always that tension, but sometimes you want your scholars to speak for themselves. They say it so beautifully. Donald Schoen also speaks to this issue of focusing on the precision of impact or effect in our SoTL work. In the very topography of professional practice, there's a high, hard ground overlooking a swamp. Gotta love that. On the high ground, manageable problems lend themselves to solution through the use of research-based theory and technique. In the swampy lowlands, problems are messy and confusing and incapable of technical solution. The irony of the situation is that the problems of the high ground tend to be relatively unimportant to individuals or to the society at large, however great their technical interest may be, while in the swamp lie the greatest problems of human concern. The practitioner then is confronted with a choice. Shall he remain on the high ground where he can solve relatively unimportant problems according to his standards of rigor, those which demonstrate effect? Or shall he descend into the swamp of important problems where he cannot be rigorous in any way he knows how to describe? So these two quotes speak to one of the reasons why this conversation of effect or even impact never quite sit right with me. I know they're important, I know they have to happen, but for me, it's hard to participate in them fully because there's this nagging feeling of, oh, it's too clean for what we're doing. So in these conversations of impact and effect, I worry about what's lost when we focus solely, or even just primarily, on what's measurable versus what's meaningful. One of my favorite quotes is from my oracle, Gary Poole. He encourages us to shift from an imperative of proof to an imperative of understanding, from an imperative of generalizable simplicity to one of representing complexity well. Is that not perfect? That one thing we're trying to do in SoTL is represent the complexity of teaching and learning, and not learning, and failing at teaching, and failing at learning. The complexity of all of that, representing that well. So that's one reason those important conversations of impact, effect, they need to keep happening, but I want to step out of those rooms. They're still happening, they're still vigorous. So looking at another way of thinking about what happens in the wake of SoTL, in another room, the metaphor of consumers of SoTL, producers of SoTL, consumers of SoTL. I want to start by saying that there are definitely problems with this metaphor. So all metaphors are inherently wrong in some way. If you think about it, a metaphor is a comparison of two dissimilar things. So they are inherently wrong, problematic, limited. This one is definitely limited. So I want to acknowledge that, but I want to first explore what's right about it, what's useful about it. The way that I'm using it here is aligned with some of the work in knowledge management, knowledge transfer, implementation science. I know there are a lot of ways of describing this field that I know little about, but I'm learning. But it's aligned with that because the focus is on the consumers of knowledge. So in the wake of SoTL, part of the way we can think about that and talk about that is in thinking about the consumers of the knowledge generated by SoTL. In this field, or these fields of implementation science, knowledge management, they talk about knowledge contributors or producers, and knowledge seekers or consumers. And so we could spend some time thinking about the consumers of SoTL, what that means, how it happens. And this, I think, is an important area for us to explore more. It's certainly an important area for me to explore more. I have to give a shout out to Lorelei Noel at the University of Calgary, a nursing PhD who introduced me to this with great excitement because she said there is so much in this area that we in SoTL can learn that would be useful, et cetera. So let's work on that, including me. So before Lorelei introduced me to implementation science, I started thinking about the idea of consumers of SoTL when at a conference a few years ago, I was talking about writing SoTL, writing up SoTL. And in the Q&A afterwards, someone stood up and with understandable frustration, talked about the crisis in medicine and medical education, where there's all this evidence that practitioners don't read the research, and so there's no effect, there's no impact, and that's a problem. Now notice again there, it's kind of boxing us into the impact and effect corner, because the idea was that this research that's written up, it's difficult to prove that there's any effect. So why read SoTL? Why write SoTL? Because no one's going to read it. Well, as a literature person and someone who loves to write, I had to really sit in that. And so I wrote a little piece called, Does Reading SoTL Matter? Because why are we going to write it if no one reads it? And that's a big if. That's a big if. And then if people do read it, who cares? Does anything happen after the few people who read it actually do that? So difficult questions of impact. I've been thinking about this. And I said these are complex questions that are hard to answer, again, with precision, but that doesn't mean they're unanswerable questions. So in there, I start talking about, we have the producers of SoTL, the practitioners who actually do the projects, and then we also have consumers of SoTL, who are an important group for us to think about that we often don't think about. So shifting to really pay more attention to what it means to consume SoTL. So we have a smaller group of people who are the producers, who actually do the work, and I wouldn't say that the goal is for everyone to do SoTL. And I was kind of thinking from the perspective of working in an institution, doing SoTL programming. Is my goal to make everyone on campus do SoTL? No. What is my goal? To get as many people on campus to, in some way, consume SoTL. And so really thinking about what that means. That's also more realistic. But what does it mean to consume SoTL, and how can we make that happen? And so in that piece, I write, it's very brief, but I write about how readers of SoTL, for instance, who come to the SoTL Journal Club that I was running, or just happen to read a SoTL article because of a workshop or because someone recommended it, the way they can help with this consumption. And I'll let you read that and see more. But reading as one of the ways of consuming SoTL, and then what we do with that reading experience. Oh, right. And then thinking more about who are the consumers of SoTL, the potential consumers of SoTL in an institutional context. So just kind of breaking it down. I'll come back to this a little later. So what does this metaphor get right, consumers? What does this metaphor get right? First, I think it shifts our attention to the oh so important group of people who don't do SoTL. So we're all very important people. We're very important people. Very important. But I think more important than us are the people that you see when you go back to your campus, the people, your colleagues that you're going to chat with on Facebook, for those of you who are still Facebook. Some of you might use Twitter and Snapchat and what is TikTok? I don't even know. But your colleagues elsewhere who don't do SoTL for a variety of reasons, who may not know what SoTL is, those are the most important people, I think, for us to think about. So the idea of the conversation and the metaphor of consumers gets right our shift to that audience and thinking of them not as naysayers. Also, the idea of consume can have a lot of different meanings. What does it mean to consume? I kind of jumped to the idea of reading, just because of what interests me. Reading is one way of consuming it. Talking about it is another way. We'll get to some ideas about that in a little bit, but it invites us to think about what are the myriad ways that those colleagues elsewhere might consume SoTL, whether it's a nibble or a feast. This metaphor also is helpful because the producers and consumers idea, I think, helps us get away from a conversation that's in one of the other rooms on what's the difference between SoTL and scholarly teaching. Have you heard that conversation? Have you kind of seen that conversation? It's a conversation that's going to keep happening. It's just one of those that's always happening in a parlor. What's the difference between SoTL and scholarly teaching? And it's usually deployed in conversations about, is this SoTL or is it not SoTL? So this kind of gatekeeping or boundary setting. Important conversation in some contexts, but interesting. So Lee Shulman, perhaps inadvertently, I think set it up in this kind of well-known passage where he talks about scholarly teaching in SoTL, and the important part is the highlighted part. Scholarly teaching is what each of us should be engaged with every day, but it is only when we have these other conditions that we have the scholarship of teaching. So this This is what we all do, but this is special. Potter and Kustra have this wonderful article, again, part of this conversation. This is one of my favorites. They talk about these distinct constructs of SoTL and scholarly teaching. They have these lovely definitions. They are part of a conceptual pair, but they are distinct constructs. Allen and Field have this lovely table that kind of demonstrates the binary, I think, and they differ across 4 dimensions. So again, very different, very binary, very opposite. And then I love this. STLHE has it as a cage match. Versus. So they're as different as apples and oranges in a way in this binary, as in kind of any binary suggests that. Scholarly teaching, SoTL, and it becomes this kind of circular conversation that I'm not sure, where does it go? So they're different in many ways, very important, different apples and oranges, but ultimately it's messier than that. Apples and oranges are both edible, warm in color, similar shape, contain seeds, etc. So setting up that binary of apples and oranges, scholarly teaching and SoTL, takes us only so far. And I think the producers and consumers, there's a little danger of the same thing happening there. Because of the way our minds work, producer and consumer, doer, non-doer, us and them, with producer in a way privileged over the consumer. So little discomfort with that. It also invokes those who can do, those who can't teach. Hate that, hate that. You know Schulman's revision of that. Let's see if I can get it. Those who can do, those who understand teach. So yeah, love that. Thank you, Lee Schulman. Anyway. So the producers and consumers helps us get away from that conversation, step outside of that conversation of is it SoTL or is it scholarly teaching? But, how's that? But ultimately the metaphor of consumers gets in the way, I think. This one is particularly problematic, and I think particularly these days and these economic times, the inherent association with the corporatization of the university. I think it's hard to get past that when we talk about consumers. It's very transactional, very utilitarian, and again, it kind of falls into that binary. So let's step out of that conversation, and let's finally get to the conversation that I want to have. This idea of resonance. And here's one of those terms that means something to all of us and has some very precise definitions in a few disciplines. So if you are in music or physics, be kind, okay? I'll do my best. I had a long conversation with a physicist the other day just to make sure it was kind of safe, and she gave me the thumbs up, so we'll see. Because you know, when someone uses a term that's like really important in your discipline and they use it maybe metaphorically as a generous way of saying it, you're like, not quite right. Okay, so resonance has multiple meanings, and I'm going to focus on just 3. There are more, and I started to go down this rabbit hole of etymology. Okay, so I'm going to focus on 3 meanings of resonance. The first one is resonance as in a quality that makes something personally meaningful or important to you. And we've heard that, we've used that, it resonates with me. Kind of the idea that it rings true, that it's relevant, that it hits home or hits close to home, that it matches my experience, right? That idea of resonance. So within SoTL, just thinking about what this kind of resonance might mean. I think about, again, I think about that idea of transferring or generalizing from one context to another. In other words, let's say I read an article in CBE, the journal CBE, biologists, literary scholar, biology. CBE is one of my favorite journals. So when I read an article in CBE by Kim Tanner on metacognition in biology, she's talking about metacognition, okay? But she's talking about intro to biology. She's talking about these large classes. I'm in literary studies. I tend to teach small classes. But I don't outright reject that article because I do the work of resonance. I do the work of generalizing, of sorting through what matches my experience and what doesn't, filtering out what doesn't, and then taking away what's meaningful for me. That's that work that we do, that we need to do, that we do, of generalizing or transferring from one context to another. So how that article resonates with me. Or there's a study from the Netherlands on small group diversity and how the diversity of small groups, and specifically with gender and nation, that kind of diversity, leads to greater cognitive complexity in the work that they do. But it's from the Netherlands. Not relevant to me, I live in Florida. Not necessarily. So we do that work of translating it, generalizing it, so that there's resonance, becomes personally meaningful. So then the work of SoTL is meaningful and it has potential and it's not boxed in. So there's that meaning of resonance. Okay, here we go with some disciplinary. Second meaning of resonance that I think is worth our time in thinking about. It's the quality of a sound that stays loud and clear and deep for a long time, or the persistence of a sound after it's produced. So I love this idea. We often hear about it as a ripple effect, kind of metaphorically speaking. That kind of captures, I think, what this idea of resonance means. A few things to notice. This idea of resonance, notice that it's unidirectional. There's one agent or one actor that creates the resonance, produces the sound, or drops the pebble in the river. And then the resonance moves outward. In the previous example, the previous definition, it's also one actor, one producer of the resonance, but that resonance is moving inward. There's a receiving of resonance, but they're singular. That's important, so we'll come back to that. But I think that's an important characteristic of this kind of resonance. So this concept of resonance as the quality of a sound that stays for a long time, that lasts well after it's produced. Oh, I had to show this. I think is also captured in, is it Xavi Bo, do you think? This just popped up on public radio the other day, so I just had to show it because it resonated with this definition. These are birds. So in a way, this is the resonance of birds, the quality of a sound well after it's produced, how a sound and here, how a flight is present after it's produced. So I just love this. I'm also fascinated with murmurations of starlings, so I try to work them in whenever I can, so this was kind of perfect. But this is one way of thinking about resonance. Resonance of SoTL. So in teaching and learning, I think we have some ideas that are pretty in line with this idea of resonance. So Wiggins and McTighe, their idea of enduring understanding, that we design courses and assignments and just about anything backwards by thinking about what is the enduring understanding you want your students to have. Or 5 years from now, 2 of your students meet in a coffee shop, they haven't seen each other in 5 years, what do you want them to talk about? That's the enduring understanding. That's the resonance you want your course to have. Yeah, we have learning objectives and learning goals and those things, but they start with what is the enduring understanding you want your students to have. So that's resonance. I think this idea of deep learning is also about resonance. It lasts, it's profound. And then in the idea of threshold concepts, the qualities of being transformative and irreversible, I think speak to a sense of resonance in learning. So we have this idea in teaching and learning, resonance in teaching and learning, these lasting effects after the sound is produced, after the teaching happens, or after the teaching and learning moment happens, the resonance. But what about in SoTL? What is the ripple effect in SoTL? What are the ripple effects in SoTL? So resonance for practitioners, the persistence of a sound long after it's produced. I'm still working on this, but this is where you can help. So for me, as a SoTL practitioner, thinking about resonance, for instance, again, the power of reading for me is really important. So I think back quite a while ago when I first read The Elements and Pleasures of Difficulty by Marielena Salvatore and Patricia Donahue. That text, the result of a SoTL project that they did, has stayed with me and has affected me since then in so many ways, in thinking about students, when students encounter difficulty, thinking about myself when teaching a difficult text, which I love, and then students get frustrated because to them it's difficult and what's going on there. And so there's a SoTL project and resulting text that has resonated with me in the sense of it's persisted after that moment of reading, and it's had some kind of sense of changing my understanding of everything, really. Or another resonance of SoTL on this practitioner, I think of one of the projects that I did that was a miserable failure in the best of ways. Worked with some colleagues to design an activity, doesn't really matter what it is, to help our introductory literature students in a particular way, and it didn't. Didn't at all, failed miserably. But in that failure, as we were looking at, oh, this is not what we had hoped for, and this is not what we wanted, and this is not what that was supposed to teach them, what emerged was, oh, this is where they're going wrong. This is where they're confused. This is where this concept is confusing to them. And so doing SoTL, there was this kind of failed moment in teaching and seemingly failed moment in SoTL that then became this really rich source of understanding my students better and understanding how they learn the discipline of literary studies better or don't because of I now understood better what trips them up. And the resonance of that project, doing that project on me, has been profound. Don't get too wedded to initial SoTL project plans. Don't assume you know what's going on in students' minds when you teach. Don't assume you know what the problem is until you've actually made it visible and surfaced it. Let the data tell you what it is that needs to be learned rather than forcing the data to answer my question. So, for a practitioner of SoTL, the persistence of that sound, the persistence of that experience, that's resonance. So thinking about, for you, for others, what are other ways to think about resonance? This definition of resonance of SoTL, think about that for when we have a conversation shortly. But beyond ourselves, and this I don't have an answer to yet, but I know a lot of you in this room do. Beyond ourselves, what about the students who are part of the SoTL projects, not the fellow, the partners who are doing it, because they're practitioners too. I'm talking about the students who are the participants in the sense of my students who were doing this activity and they got confused and didn't do what we wanted, but taught us a lot. So just in general, for students who are participants in SoTL, what's the resonance for them? What should be the resonance for them? What should stay with them for a long time after our inquiry? Something for us to really think about. We think a lot now about the student partners. We do think about our student participants, but I'm not sure that we've thought a lot about our student participants in this way. What do we want to resonate with them? What do we want that enduring understanding to be as a result of SoTL? Okay, now I'm going to come to a third, more snow. Third definition of resonance that, okay, so any physicists in the room? Ooh, okay, be nice. Okay. So, resonance in physics, but also, it's also in music, but the technical work, I think, is done in physics with sound. Okay, and it's very technical sounding. This definition of resonance is an object's natural vibration frequency responding to an external stimulus of the same frequency. Or to kind of think of it in terms of sound, it's a harmonic phenomenon, and this physicist I talked with the other day pointed me specifically to sympathetic resonance. Isn't that pretty? Sympathetic resonance, I love that. It's when you play a musical note and the sound waves reverberate, and then if there's another object that has the same natural vibration or frequency, it will sound. So sympathetic resonance. I could talk about the Rubin's tube, and it's very technical and hard to explain briefly and not quite as easy to demonstrate with a visual, but this image and helps us understand something really important about this idea of resonance. Notice there are two. The previous ideas of resonance, there was one actor involved. The first one, resonance comes to me, it's personally something is personally meaningful to me. The other is the kind of ripple effect outward of how others experience outward from that single moment. Here we are necessarily talking about the relationship between two things. So to create that resonance. So this term has been used in this definition in teaching and learning and in SoTL. And I'm going to start with a later way the term has been used because it's simpler, and then I'll come to the earlier way that's a little more complex. So this idea of pedagogical resonance is a thing, is a term. People have used it. So in 2010, John Polias talked about pedagogical resonance, and he went to the Rubens tube, and he kind of does the more technical thing, but I'll let him briefly explain. In wave theory in physics, waves can cancel each other out when they're not pulsating in unison, when they do not resonate, but amplify each other when they are pulsating in unison. So the metaphor, his idea of pedagogical resonance, is that when the how we teach wave and the what we want to teach wave are synchronized so that they resonate with each other, we achieve heightened learning. That's kind of nice. Put more simply, he says that how we teach should resonate with what we teach. And he's specifically talking about multimodal learning, or what we would even more specifically call dual coding. The idea that the visuals that we use, for instance, while we're teaching, should not distract, should not confuse, but should be resonant with what we're talking about. So for instance, I thought about doing this, but then I'd mess up. Like if I threw up there a picture of my cat. That's a silly example, but we do things like that, not necessarily like that precisely, but when we teach, we may introduce a visual or put up a quote that's not resonant with what we're wanting to teach, because it's too far afield of a metaphor, or a quote that we're not reading and actually dealing with. So you're hearing me teach, and then there's this quote up here, and you're like, I don't know where to pay attention. And so resonance would align the two. So that's Polias's idea of pedagogical resonance. Earlier, you may be familiar with Keith Trigwell and Suzanne Shale have this other idea of pedagogic resonance that's a little more complex. So let's see if I can take you with me here. So they talk about pedagogic resonance, and they say this is the apex of our conception of the scholarship of teaching. So first I should tell you that in this article, they're responding to what they see as too much emphasis of research in SoTL. Too much emphasis that SoTL is research, which then makes us focus on our colleagues or our peers. They want us to think about SoTL as our practice. Not research, but as practice, so that we focus then on our students. So they are objecting to this increasing focus on SoTL as research, which they argue takes our focus away from the actual students. I kind of wonder, can't we do both? But that's that's another conversation. So in their conception of SoTL, which is practice-based, which is focused on the actual work that we do in the classroom or in the learning context, that is the apex of SoTL for them. And the metaphor they use throughout the article is the metaphor of a bridge. So resonance, pedagogic, I have to always pause there, pedagogic resonance for Trigwell and Shale is when there is a bridge between teaching knowledge, the teacher's knowledge, and student learning that results from that knowledge. A good thing. But they go into it in really rich ways, I think, that can then point us in some directions for our broader conversation. So let's kind of dig in and see how they talk about pedagogic resonance. So first, they describe it in these ways, and it's provocative in the best of ways, I think. Okay, so pedagogic resonance, they say, resonant acts of knowledge work with students. They describe it as knowledge work with students, or how knowledge is used in action with students, and which elements of that knowledge lead to learning. Again, the teacher's knowledge. They also describe it as scholarly energy that creates situations in which students learn. So again, their idea here is when I'm teaching, I have all this knowledge, content knowledge, pedagogical content knowledge, and the apex of SoTL, the height, the goal of SoTL, is when my knowledge results in students learning. Not a bad thing. I want to read just a little bit. They have a remarkable 3 paragraphs in their article where they describe what's going on in the teacher's mind in this moment of pedagogic resonance. They call it, what do they call it? Okay, 2 things here. They call it the reality of teachers' knowledge work. I just like that. Okay, so bear with me. I'm not going to read all 3 paragraphs because it's a lot. I recommend checking it out just because it's interesting, but I'll read the highlights. Okay, and when I did my talk at SoTL, I forgot my reading glasses and it was a disaster. So, yes, welcome to 50 plus. Okay. Okay. The basic idea is that a teacher will at any time be aware of a great many things. Some things will be in the background of their awareness. Others, ideally those related to teaching, will be more to the fore of their awareness, and this is while in the classroom while teaching. Then they say some more. In any real-time teaching situation, approaches, concerns, concepts, subject matter, emotions, and personal objectives that arrive from moment to moment in the fore of a teacher's awareness will be a function of the teacher's perceptions of the environment in which they're working, as well as their understanding of the subject and the knowledge of teaching and their knowledge of context. So all this stuff is swirling around in the teacher's mind while teaching. The cognitive responses and emotional reactions of students to the teachers to the students, and the students to students during collaborative meaning making evoke all aspects of awareness of all the parties. So I have all this stuff swirling around in my mind while I'm teaching. I'm fully present, clearly. I'm also aware of how the students are reacting, thinking about what they're thinking. That's pedagogic resonance. It is this evoked awareness, the dynamic, reciprocal, fluid engagement with students and related action that we must seek to capture in SoTL. Now I can see you, okay. So that's the resonant act of knowledge work with students, this idea of pedagogic resonance that Trigwell and Shale say should be our focus in SoTL, capturing those moments when all that's swirling around in my mind resonates, vibrates with, makes ring students. They also describe it then, that moment, as collaborative meaning making with students. Or learning is conceived of as a collaboration between teacher and student. Or teaching is an activity that emerges in collaboration with students as partners in learning. Now, I think it's important, especially to people in this room, to step back and say they're talking about a different kind of partnership or collaboration that I'm not sure that people in the students as partner conversation would say this is a full partnership, which is fine. But the idea here is that it's collaborative because I, as teacher, am, let's go with it, fully in tune with the students and following the students where they need. And then just the last little quote. Student-centered pedagogic resonance is evoked from pedagogic content knowledge, what I know about my field and how students learn it and what's confusing. It's evoked from that knowledge and the student needs in this situation, again. So that moment of being fully present with the students. They have a great example of this. This professor is lecturing, and it's the beginning of the lecture, and he's orally quizzing students in the big lecture class on key aspects of the last period, the last class period. And then a couple of students walk in late, quite late. Now think about how you might react, or how some of your colleagues might react. He says, okay, and he asks, he starts quizzing them on those key aspects of the last lecture, right as they walk in the door. Students get it right. And he says, okay, you can keep coming to class late. So Trigwell and Shale say in that moment, there is pedagogic resonance. Because for some reason, the student need was coming late, but they're still learning. Well, kind of interesting. So if this pedagogic resonance is the apex of SoTL, what's an example in SoTL? Those were in the classroom. They offer an example. They describe a study in which the teacher and some of the students from a class watch a video recording of the class. So a class period is recorded. And the teacher separately from the students, they watch the video. And while they're watching a video, they reflect on their experience in the class at the time. So they're kind of reflecting on what they were doing and thinking and experiencing in that moment on the screen. I think it's McAlpine and Weston, yes, are the researchers here. Now they analyze what they called these parallel transcripts from the teacher and the students in reflecting on that experience. And they're looking for what Trigwell and Shale would say is pedagogic resonance. The points when there is synergy in the reflection between the teacher and the students. So they're looking for insights into the process of the intentional collaborative meaning making of pedagogic resonance by capturing those moments when particular students experience that which was intended by the teacher. Trigwell and Shale say that that should be our focus in SoTL, capturing those moments, those magical moments, as you will. Think about those times when something seems to be resonating, magical in class. It's happening. What is it? What does it look like? How do students experience it? How do we experience it? So this is one example that Trigwell and Shale give. This is the height of what they describe as practice-centered SoTL, pushing back again against SoTL as research. I propose that it is both practice-based research, I think. So let's nudge that idea a little further. So Pelias's idea of pedagogical resonance is that what we teach should match how we teach, should resonate with, should reflect how we teach. There should be resonance between the two. Trigwell and Shale's pedagogic resonance is that there should be resonance, alignment, a match. They should sing the teacher knowledge and the student learning, students learning. And I just started going down this rabbit hole of, I think they would say students learning and not students apostrophe learning. And then, what does that mean? But that's a whole nother thing. But I think they would say that it's the connection between the teacher knowledge and the students doing learning. So what is SoTL resonance? And this is, I think, our big question. The resonance between the practice of SoTL, practitioners doing the work of SoTL, and what? The resonance between the knowledge that we're generating in SoTL, the products of SoTL, if you will, and what? And I think this is the conversation we should start having, or continue having, in a room down the hall from impact and effect, and even consumers. I think we have in the research by Torgny Roksa and Katarina Martinson, I think we have a strong start. I think they are very effectively capturing a SoTL resonance, a kind of SoTL resonance. Many of you are probably familiar with their work, but for those of you who aren't, in quite a few publications, this is just one, they're talking about the conversations that teachers have with each other and who they talk to and what those conversations are about and the resonance of those conversations. So they say individual teachers seem to have small, what they call significant networks, where private discussions provide the basis for conceptual development and learning, quite different from the front stage of the formal public debate about teaching. So there are these really important conversations that you have with your trusted colleagues that are not here, that are not in the conference sessions, but maybe in your hallway conversations, and then later. And during those conversations, it's a very particular kind of conversation. They describe it, I think it was intellectually intriguing, so not, what's an appropriate phrase? Just chatting, not ranting, which are important conversations to have. But intellectually intriguing, or I would say informed by something, with trusted colleagues. And they say in those discussions, in those conversations, Teachers allow themselves to be influenced to such an extent that they develop or even sometimes drastically change their personal understanding of teaching and learning. So think about that. I just did a SoTL project, or I just read an article, or I just heard a keynote, or I just went to a conference. And I later have a conversation, a certain kind of conversation. Kind of, oh, you know, this is this thing I've been thinking about, or oh, I learned, da-da-da-da-da, with a trusted colleague. And even if that colleague was nowhere near that conference, that workshop, that article, there's resonance. There's a chance for resonance. There's a chance for completely changing their understanding of teaching and learning. And then we could kind of follow what happens in the wake of when your deep understanding of teaching and learning has been changed, what happens then? So this resonance, SoTL resonance, is between SoTL practice and knowledge and colleagues or peers. But, as Cherie pointed out, I'm increasingly interested, because others have been having this conversation well before me, so it's not me. I'm moved by lots of others who are having this conversation about who are we talking to in SoTL? Who should we be talking to? If the scholarship of teaching and learning is about going public, who's the public? I know who we've been thinking about as the public, but particularly in these times, but at any time, what about the public off campus? Who out there do we want SoTL to resonate with? Who can we create SoTL resonance with out there? How public do we go? And how can we create that resonance? Because the two tuning forks, they have to be of similar frequency. So we have to figure out what the frequency is for those outer circles to create that resonance. It's not that we just keep talking the way we talk and then they'll go, oh. We have to, like Trigwell and Shale in that pedagogic resonance, we have to be aware of their needs in thinking about resonance there. Out and out. You may have seen, just a quick plug, SoTL is starting a second model of their international collaborative writing groups, which is when they get together 7, 8, 9 people from across the globe of different ranks and institutions and disciplines and everything. They get these groups together and they write about something. And they've been magical. We're now starting a second model on public SoTL to work on this question of how do we create resonance with a different kind of public. Who is that public? How can we create that resonance? What does that look like? What does that sound like? So we have the applications for the co-leaders, but you'll soon be seeing calls for applications for participants to mobilize this conversation, to organize this conversation. So look for that. But again, the question is, how do we resonate beyond our usual conversations? How do we create that resonance with a new public? And that's it. with that, I'll take some questions. While I get something to drink.
Thanks so much for that, Nancy. We have a few minutes of questions. There are a couple of us around the room. I'm looking for who else has a roving mic. Nicole at the back, and we'll try and run around without sliding on this slippery floor. If you're given the mic, could you say your name and the institution where you come from before your question, and then that gives us a sense of who is in the room. Catherine, I see you ahead.
Thanks, Judy. Thanks, Liz. That was really lovely. I'm Anderson from McMaster, and I love metaphors. And as a linguist and as a singer, I especially love the metaphor of resonance and sympathetic resonance. But then your picture of the bridge got me thinking about pushing on this metaphor some. And so I have to tell a little story about being in the military. So you know, when soldiers are walking long distances, they march in step. Right, left, right, left, right, left, right. But when they get to a bridge, they have to break step because walking in step, if it resonates with the sympathetic frequency of the bridge can collapse. So that's a spot where resonance is dangerous.
Isn't that terrifying? Sorry, anyway.
So here's my question. Are there places in our work where sympathetic resonance could be dangerous?
Yes. Now, what a great question. What a beautiful way to get there. I love that. Right. I mean, I think part of what that metaphor implies is the danger of groupthink. And the strength of, one of the strengths of SoTL is our multidisciplinarity, our internationality, the fact that we don't walk in step with each other is our strength. So certainly, just in my work, one of the more dangerous conversations, one of the more dangerous in step is when we talk about, this is how you do SoTL. This is what a SoTL project looks like. That's not a SoTL project. That's not research. So that comes to mind, but oh, what a wonderful extension of the metaphor and caution. Nice.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Michael Mikowski here at McMaster University. I kind of tried this insight in terms of pedagogical resonance. And one of the comments you made in terms of was following the students kind of where they lead, which in my mind evokes the concept of andragogical kind of structure. And yet that word kind of seems a reluctance or hesitancy to use that term when that seems to be what we're describing in a way. Any thoughts?
Yeah, people will have better thoughts than I, yes, and I just think that andragogy is a term that is used by specific groups of people and just hasn't caught on to others, because when we talk about pedagogy, we don't mean children, and we don't mean that kind of infantilizing. So we're not thinking about, oh, we need to specify adult. That's not a very thoughtful response, but I just think that andragogy is one of those terms that has a specific audience that uses it and just others haven't. That's not very thoughtful, though.
Thank you for the talk. It's just really, I wrote a number of things down that I'm going to reflect on. Especially, just personally meaningful and how doing this work really changes you. And having taught for 20 years, it's been the last 3 or 4 that I've really thought more about what I've been doing for 20 years. yeah, you should, that's an interesting question, but don't do that because that will not get published. Right? So we have that same problem coming up when we're thinking too much about the consumer, not tackling those messy, complex, swamp type of problems.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And I think that is a similar dilemma with the, if you do work because you know there are consumers, it's like if you do work because you know it's measurable, because the consumers of that are the people you need to speak to. And is there value? Yes, there's value in work that may not have a particular audience in mind, but you know is significant in some way. Yes, because as again, my oracle, Gary Poole, is constantly reminding us there are questions that need to be asked, that our constraints and our collapsing of what it means to do SoTL prevents. And so we need to allow these questions, no matter what the answer, no matter who the audience. So yes. Not pushing back at all, actually. Resonated with me. Okay. Get too silly.
We've got time for one final, okay, two final questions. Let's get this person here as well.
Thanks. Raj from the Rock School Management at the University of Toronto. Thank you for your deep discussion today. Two questions. Could you please read for us the article that you mentioned that deeply resonated with you? I think I got a little bit of it. It was based on a self-study that really resonated with you.
The Elements and Pleasures of Difficulty, Salvatore and Donahue. It's a little book for students, and that's interesting in itself. What they wrote as a result of their SoTL study was a textbook for students based on what they learned. So it's lovely. The Elements and Pleasures of Difficulty.
My question directly is, as we think about resonance as a relative impact, how should we measure for that both in the classroom and in the work we aspire to do as scholars?
Yeah, so my quick answer is I don't know. But I think the example that Trigwell and Shale give us points us in one direction. So looking at those parallel transcripts and looking for those moments of synergy or resonance, there's something there we can capture, if not measure. And then in the work of Roxa and Martinson, there's something happening in those conversations. So again, capturing them, which they're doing and others are doing. Again, I don't know about measuring, but capturing, documenting. But I intentionally kind of avoid thinking about how to measure resonance. Someone else can do that. And I'll probably start thinking about it more, but yeah.
Hi,
Hi.
my name is Rennie. I'm from McMaster. I had a question. You mentioned something about how we need to focus on what's meaningful, how are we making a difference, and we're less about how we measure things and getting the values and data that's necessary. However, but in order to show that it's meaningful and that it makes an impact and that it makes a difference, we need values and data, because that's how we get across that
Absolutely.
unfortunate bureaucracy for building those courses. So how do you suggest we go around that?
I suggest we don't. Those are conversations and practices and activities that need to continue, and that many will continue. We don't all have to continue it. So I don't know that those two rooms need to be joined, the impact and effect and then resonance. I think the two can happen separately. We will still get measures of impact and data about effects. But let's think about, and again, maybe someone else will figure out ways to measure resonance, but let's think about ways to capture it, to document it, to develop it and explore it before we jump to how can we measure it. And I know that that's knowing the pressures of everything that's weighing down on us, that's hard, but let's also trust that some of our colleagues are working really hard on those conversations. That's kind of a cop-out, but yeah.
Colleagues, can we show our appreciation for
Thank you.